Okay, hi everyone. Thank you all for being here. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm Flannery Winchester. I'm CCL's Communications Coordinator. And today we're going to hear from some other organizations who support the Energy Innovation Act. So we'll learn how they're talking about the legislation to their own volunteers and to members of Congress. And so we hope you'll take away the understanding that even if a group hasn't outright endorsed the Energy Innovation Act, many of them are doing incredibly useful things to move the conversation forward. And we'll also take audience questions at the end. So if at any point you have a question, you can write it on a card from your folder, and someone will pick it up. So here today with us is Emily Wiersma from the Friends Committee for National Legislation. Yeah, give her some applause. We also have Salome Garcia from the Clio Institute in Florida. And on the end in his trout socks is Steve Moyer from Trout Unlimited. So each of our panelists will start off with a few minutes to tell us just broadly how their organizations are engaging with carbon pricing and with the Energy Innovation Act. So Salome, would you like to start us off? Awesome.
Okay. So thank you so much for that introduction. So again, my name is Salome Garcia, and I'm with the Clio Institute in Miami. And we run the Florida Climate Pledge. So the Florida Climate Pledge is our statewide climate change education and outreach campaign. And we really work to connect the links between climate change and the everyday impacts of climate change. So, we always joke and say that one of the worst things that ever happened to the climate change movement is that it became only an environmental issue. And although more people are talking about climate change today than, say, 10 or even 5 years ago, one of the things that's happened is that people often don't realize that climate change is not only an environmental issue, but it's really an issue multiplier. And it really touches on almost every single aspect of our everyday lives. When we talk about climate change, we're also talking about gentrification, we're talking about climate displacement, immigration, extreme health, anything from respiratory issues. And so really what we're working is we actually have a groundswell of organizers throughout the state of Florida that's actually working to talk to everyday residents, thousands of people a week, and really challenge people to think critically about the way that climate change is impacting their everyday lives. So through our work, we actually uplift 3 major solutions at the local, state, national, and international level. We advocate for a just transition to 100% renewable energy. We advocate for a decreased reliance of our fossil fuel infrastructure, such as offshore oil drilling and fracking. And then third but not least, we also focus on, of course, a market-based incentives to decrease our carbon emissions at the global level, one, of course, being the carbon tax. Through our Florida Climate Pledge work, we do a lot of real great stuff, but one of my favorite things is really focusing on equity and vulnerable populations throughout the state of Florida through challenging our friends and our neighbors and our residents to create something that we like to call video testimonials. So a video testimonial is a short 15, 30, 45-second video where a person is critically thinking about why climate change is personal to them. Whether it be a moment in their lives where they realize that climate change is something that is impacting their life or their friend's life or their family's life. Because while you walk into a room and maybe 9 out of 10 people will believe in climate change, that same group of people, maybe only half, will really believe that climate change impacted their week or the past month. So challenging people to create video testimonials is not only powerful and engaging for members of Congress and different stakeholders, but it also challenges our grassroots movement to be spokespeople and storytellers for their own story. So we always encourage Citizens Climate Lobby and our local partners and the local chapters across the state to encourage their membership to volunteer, whether it be online or in person, encouraging their chapter to create video testimonials, send us video testimonials, we put them up on our website, and that way when we visit with members of Congress, legislators, different stakeholders, we not only have thousands of petition signatures, but we also have hundreds of videos from their constituents about different ways that people are feeling the impacts of climate change on an everyday level.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, Emily, you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. It's so good to be with you all today. I'm with the Friends Committee on National Legislation, which is the nonpartisan Quaker lobby in the public interest. And we've worked very closely with CCL and its volunteers over the many years, and so it's wonderful to be here. So our sole job is to try to get Congress to pass policies that reflect Quaker values, one of which is stewardship. So my work the past 6.5 years has been trying to foster bipartisan climate action in Congress. One of the main policies that FCNL advocates for is carbon pricing. We believe that a carbon tax alone won't be enough to address the climate crisis, but it is a really major component of the kind of the suite of solutions that we're going to need. And we think having a price on carbon can only make everything else easier to do. So at this time, FCNL has not endorsed a particular carbon price, but are working to build up support for all 7 of the existing carbon pricing bills in Congress, including the 4 bills that are bipartisan. So we have carbon pricing principles on our website, which we use to help evaluate policy. We've done comprehensive bill analyses of almost all of the bills, of 6 of 7 right now, which you can find on our website. And our ask to constituents is to urge their members of Congress to support carbon pricing and to get this done in a bipartisan fashion. So I co-chair a working group of about 25 national religious organizations, and we meet twice a month to talk about policies in Congress and ways that we can do joint advocacy. And carbon pricing has been one of our focuses this year. So we're in the process of drafting interfaith principles on carbon pricing, which we hope to release very soon. Having a meeting tomorrow to finalize these. But a lot of the work that we're doing within this working group is asking really specific questions around how a carbon price could affect those most vulnerable. So we specifically call out low-income households, communities of color, rural communities, indigenous people, maybe those who aren't in the wage economy, those with chronic health problems and disabilities, really trying to lift up kind of our moral obligation and responsibility to those most vulnerable, and figuring out how do you design carbon pricing legislation that really meets those needs. So, one of the reasons that FCNL hasn't endorsed a particular bill at this time is that we're still open to kind of a variety of uses of revenue and ways to structure policy, so long as it meets our principles. But I would say that a lot of Quaker meetings have either chosen to endorse the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividends Act or are working actively on carbon pricing. And so a lot of Quaker meetings have peace and social concerns committees or social justice committees that are really great to connect with. Quakers have a very similar model of grassroots lobbying that CCL does. And so I think you'll find ready partners with Quakers, but also with other faith communities on the ground.
Great, thank you. Steve.
Greetings all, I'm Steve Moyer with Trout Unlimited, and it's a great honor and a privilege to be with you all today. We have become good friends with CCL and have really come to rely on them to be a great partner with Trout Unlimited in our work on climate change. But even with that good friendship, when CCL asked me to come today, I said, Veterans Day, I have off today. I'm going to sleep in. I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to fish, maybe get a haircut, because clearly I need a haircut. I don't know if I can really fit that in today, But it dawned on me that I really need to fit it in today, and we really need to fit climate change solutions into our lives. And surely, if I can find... Thank you, but not necessary. Surely if I can find 2 hours in my day today to be with you, that's a good thing. And surely if we can find a little bit of support for this bill and get it passed, that's going to be a really good thing. So with all that in mind, I decided today was a good time for me to be here with you. Trout Unlimited is a really interesting organization. I've had the great fortune to work for TU for 27 years, and I've come to love it. It is an organization of 300,000 members and supporters spread across the country, but mostly where the trout and salmon are. And we're organized into about 400 local chapters who work on restoring and protecting their local streams, but then also about teaching kids to fish, taking kids out to learn to tie flies and do projects. We're really trying to get younger and smarter and more diverse in our work. And so we all don't look like me. Far too many of our members look too much like me. But one of the things we found is that working on climate change really attracts younger members, and so that's one of the many reasons we're working on it. But back to that theme about trying to fit it into the day, TU members and TU staff work on a whole variety of trout and salmon issues, largely on protecting and restoring habitat, whether it's small projects in local areas, cleaning up streams or restoring streams, all the way up to very big projects like restoring the Penobscot River in Maine and the Klamath in California and Oregon, and then protecting Bristol Bay in Alaska. Big things, small things. We do all those things, but increasingly we realize that it will be all for naught unless we solve this problem, and we better step up as an organization to figure out how to do it. You know, what's more of a task for an organization that likes cold water than to make sure the water doesn't get too hot, right? It's pretty fundamental. So I'll just close with saying that the market-based solution is a good fit for our more conservative-leaning members. We tell them and we get them to do this advocacy work because we think it can actually get past Congress if it's a bipartisan solution. And then lastly, I'll just say CCL is such a good fit for Trout Unlimited because it's science-based, it's local, it's grassroots, and we have found that in our local chapters and around the country that CCL is a great partner for our chapters and our members. So just, as I said, honored to be here and so thrilled to be with people who actually want to save the planet. How about that? Imagine that. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Steve. So, Emily, as you mentioned, in addition to the Energy Innovation Act, we've seen several other bipartisan carbon pricing bills pop up in the House this year. Can you share your thoughts about why FCNL sees multiple bills as useful and how you communicate the differences between them?
Yes, it's a very exciting time to be working on carbon pricing. So as a resource, FCNL put together a carbon pricing comparison chart that actually shows all 7 bills at one time and how they're different. And so you can find this on our website, fcnl.org/carbon pricing. And to me, it's a useful tool for congressional staff and for our constituents who really want to understand how the bills are different. But to me, what's really exciting is that it allows us to have really in-depth and imaginative conversations with congressional staff. So we can go into an office and say, hypothetically speaking, you have all these different options of ways that you could design a carbon price and use the revenue. So maybe a staffer has been able to avoid talking about carbon pricing because they don't want money going towards infrastructure. And so we can say, well, what about a dividend model? Or maybe the staffer is interested in carbon pricing but doesn't really know how they feel about using the money to go as a dividend. And so we can say, well, what about using the revenue for a payroll tax swap, or to do low-income assistance, or renewable energy R&D, or coastal climate resiliency and adaptation work? You know, we have so many options that to me, it's a really great way to kind of tease out from congressional staff and actually realistically learn where their boss actually stands on carbon pricing in a unique way, because there are just so many options. You can't just say, I don't like this one specific model, so I no longer have to engage. So for us, it's a net positive, and we're, like I said, I think when legislation appears to really be moving, we will consider endorsing bills, but for now, it's a really exciting time to get to learn more about policy design.
Great. Salome, Clio has been sending out street teams to educate Florida communities about the Energy Innovation Act. Can you tell us more about that? Who are the street teams talking to, and how is that going?
Yeah, definitely. So As I mentioned before, the Florida Climate Pledge, we actually operate all throughout the state of Florida. So we have 4 street teams operating right now. We have Tallahassee, Pensacola, Melbourne, Sarasota, and we're actually going to be continuing through 2020. And what our organizers are really focusing on, like I mentioned before, is talking to people, and not only talking to people about climate change, but really engaging people on the way that climate change is impacting their everyday lives. And the fact that we've only really been operating these street teams in this way for only 8 weeks, and in that time we have over 4,000 petition signatures, hundreds of volunteers, dozens of videos from all over the state. It's really just a testament not only to people that are interested in climate change, but there is a need for engagement. So one of the things that we focus on is really uplifting frontline communities and people of color, people in vulnerable situations, and that impacts, people from all over the spectrum, and especially communities that are really disproportionately impacted by the fossil fuel industry. So that can also be, for example, communities where a large percentage of the population depends on jobs for example, coal or offshore oil drilling or fracking. So it's really being able to engage with people on a one-to-one level. And one thing that the Clio Institute does is we have something called the Climate Speakers Network. And the Climate Speakers Network is where we provide constituents with experts from across different fields, from the health field to scientists. And we actually provide a certificate course where we train our leaders on how to be climate communicators. And therefore, we train them in order to be able to give really climate 101s to members of Congress, their own legislative staff, and other stakeholders in their area. So we're not only encouraging people to think critically about the way that climate change is impacting their everyday life, record a video, being able to tell their own story, but then also teach their own member of Congress or their own legislative representative what ways climate is really impacting their local area in other ways that they may not have thought about it in the past.
Great. So, Steve, you mentioned that CCL and this market-based approach is a good fit for your volunteers. Can you share more about how you see Trout Unlimited advocating for the bill? And then maybe also, what are some common questions or pushback that you get on it and how you handle that?
Yeah. Thanks. I think that perhaps our great contribution over time will be trying to get more Republicans to be supportive. It seems like the list is a little short on Republicans right now. We know how that goes. So we have practice at that, and hopefully we can contribute to that. I think one of the issues for some of our more conservative members is why the federal government solution. There's distrust of the federal government you may have heard about, and just anything that as a federal solution may not be a good one. I think one of the best things about our conservative members is that we're science-based, practical. We remember things like the Clean Air Act and acid rain, and that's one of the things we often talk to our members about. We were there when a Clean Air Act amendments passed in '90, and it really made a difference on acid rain. So, really a somewhat similar situation, a somewhat similar solution had a great benefit. It was a federal solution. Thank God EPA and the states did a good job of implementing it, and now we don't have nearly as much acid rain as we used to. So that's the kind of approach that we try to use on our unhappy, more conservative members who are distrustful of the federal government. But, really, I think a big part of what we try to do is what the point was just made is bring it home. People have to understand the impact that climate change has on their lives. And I think more and more our members who fish see it and feel it, especially in the West with drought and with fire and fishing seasons closed because the water's too warm. People are really beginning to feel the impacts. And so that's what we do. We talk about those impacts. We talk about the future with even more of those impacts. And we try to make it clear to our members and to ourselves that we need to take action sooner rather than later. So that's why we have spent a great deal of time looking at this issue carefully and looking at the solution that's provided by this bill. It may not be the only bill that we'll support over time, but it certainly is a good bill that provides a very practical solution, and that's why we're supportive of it. And that's a little bit about how we go about trying to talk to our unhappy members.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to stay with you for another question here. We have, I'm sure, some overlap already between CCL members and Trout Unlimited members, and maybe there's more potential overlap out there. Do you have any advice for volunteers who may, for our volunteers, who may want to connect more with your Trout Unlimited membership?
I have a couple thoughts on that, and I'm sure it may be a little bit discouraging to your younger people who have to deal with older people like me. Just be patient with us as we try to work with you to use the interweb and other social media. We're not so good at that sometimes. That's an example. You just have to adapt to the people who you're trying to motivate to work with you. Just remember that. And I think probably the biggest thing is just the more conservative leaning souls among us who are, potentially skeptical of federal solutions. You just have to be, I think, patient with that, work through that, use the right words and the right approach to engaging a more conservative audience and moving them towards supporting this bill.
Okay, great, thank you. Salome, I'm interested, what messaging have you guys found in your outreach and your work that resonates with members of Congress or with other people and really gets them active on either this bill or this topic in general?
Sure, something that is really amazing that has come out of the work that organizations like Citizens Climate Lobby and a lot of others have done is that, carbon tax is no longer this gray area that nobody really knows a lot about. There's a growing number of institutions, of universities that are doing some really incredible research on the kind of economic, social, political benefits that a carbon tax can provide to our society. And so what we really work to on the Clio Institute, one of our areas of interest is really bringing together a wide network of experts that can talk on these topics. And so what we do a lot of the times is really just work on educating the public. So often, a lot of people aren't really actively engaged in carbon taxing because they don't understand the nuances of what it means. And a lot of people just don't understand how a carbon tax could be implemented. It's similar to what Emily was saying, that there's a lot of different ways in which we could reinvest this revenue. And so one of the things that we do when talking to everyday constituents is really just trying to synthesize the information that's out there. So when you go to our website, when you talk to one of our canvassers, what we're really providing is other organizational platforms. So we provide information. For example, Yale has done a lot of really incredible research on actually also what percentage of constituents in different areas support a price on carbon. So one of the things that we found the most useful when sitting down with congressional offices or really even regional legislators is showing them what percentage of your constituency does approve of a carbon tax. So for example, I walked into my congressional district. So I live in Florida. My congressional representative is Mario Diaz-Balart. And when we walked into his office, his staffer was very clear. And it was, my boss does not support a price on carbon. It's not something that he's interested in supporting. He already knows it. So you're really not going to get much there. And something that I actually found really interesting is I actually brought one of the polls that Yale conducted and said, in this district, which is actually very conservative, 71% of residents actually do want a price on carbon. And that was actually one of the most instrumental moments to the relationship building with the staffer and now to my meeting with their staffer tomorrow. They wanted to know more about the methodology of the study and who conducted it and who filled out the study, because once you can prove that a constituency, regardless of political ideology, does in fact want polluters to pay and does want a price on carbon, then it becomes less about what the legislator believes or doesn't believe or want or doesn't want, and really how willing they are to follow the leader of their constituency and really represent who they claim to be representing.
Great. Emily, so do you work on, with FCNL, do you work on other topics in addition to carbon pricing? If you could just tell us a little bit more about the rest of FCNL's climate portfolio.
Yeah, it's a pretty large portfolio. I think the thing that really underlies all of our work in this program and across the organization is we seek to find that of God or the light within each legislator, each individual. So we're really looking for opportunities of shared value and common ground We're also a pretty pragmatic organization, so we look to see what are our best opportunities for actually kind of advancing action on climate change each Congress. So right now, I've been spending a lot of time working to support a number of clean energy tax credits in hopes that they can be some part of a year-end tax extenders or tax deal. So working really hard to lift up tax credits for energy storage, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, offshore wind, and wind and solar power. And so FCNL, along with other faith groups, have been going into offices urging those to be prioritized as Congress is working on a bipartisan tax deal, hopefully sometime in the next 2 months. The other thing, and I should say that a lot of people see this as one of our best opportunities for actually getting greenhouse gas emissions reductions signed into law this Congress. And so it's really important that we're pushing on this. We also do a lot of work with the appropriations process. So specifically, we work on the domestic climate and environmental accounts, but we're really focused on international climate finance. So helping to support things like the Green Climate Fund, but also other bilateral and multilateral accounts that are our government funds to help meet our obligation to the international community. So we really think that we have a moral obligation to kind of take responsibility for our historic emissions by helping other countries adapt and mitigate climate change. And so that's been a real focus for us as well.
That's great. Could you... since you mentioned the international element, could you speak to the upcoming COP and if there's anything in particular that you guys are looking for or working on related to that?
Yeah, so as some of you might have seen, this COP will be a little bit controversial. The U.S. just having announced that we've started the formal process, the year-long process to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. So that means we will technically be in the agreement until the day after the presidential election. But that's a real blow. I do think that the international community saw this coming, and so is going to continue to work as robustly as possible. There was also a last-minute change in location, and so I think it's unclear still whether all of the negotiators and the civil society participants will be able to attend in the new location, but we're hopeful. FCNL doesn't normally send a participant to the COP. We have occasionally. Instead, we really focus on lifting up congressional support for strong international action here at home. So we'll be urging senators and members of Congress to make public statements in support of the Paris Climate Agreement. We'll be urging, we've thought in years past, how do we get both Republicans and Democrat members of Congress to attend the COP themselves if they want to engage in a productive way. So we're really doing a lot of work to lift up on the domestic side how Congress can help show the international community that we are still committed to the goals of the Paris Agreement, even if the president is not.
Salome, I'm curious, so when you were responding to a prior question, you used the phrase carbon tax and also price on carbon, and in this community, especially in years past, we've been really sensitive to saying carbon fee rather than carbon tax, and of course now that it's so high in the national discourse, you hear a lot of different vocabulary. I'm curious if that has any effect in your experience on the grassroots level, or do people just kind of understand it no matter what you call it? How does that work?
Yeah, I think that's a really amazing question, because as I mentioned in the past, especially during our work with frontline communities and with people of color and people that are really juggling more than one job at a time, one of the major reasons why they don't get engaged in this type of argument is because they don't often understand the nuance of the conversation. So I think that it's really good that you mentioned that, because I think that the kind of language that we use is extremely important, and especially in having people understand the differences in the way that you use the revenue from these types of policies. So I do think that it is up to us to be able to utilize our language in an effective way, to be able to simplify and synthesize the information in as easy to understand way as possible, and kind of make the intentional decision to explain what our words mean when we're communicating these different types of policies. So yeah, I definitely think it makes a difference, and I think that it just depends on the type of audience that you're speaking to when you use certain terms.
Great. So Steve, I thought that for the the younger volunteers in the audience. You said that you, in Trout Unlimited, a lot of your membership remembers the federal solution to acid rain and have that to call back to, but a lot of our younger volunteers may not have that to call back to. I was wondering if you could give your elevator pitch for refreshing our memories about that and how that informs your advocacy on carbon pricing today.
Wow, making me do an elevator pitch. That's what we
or whatever length you'd like.
We just did that for the last half an hour. And you all were doing that, and I didn't have to do that. But now I have to do that. So the thing that I would say is that just a big national, regional problem, sulfur dioxide and air pollution. How do you find a reasonable way to fix that? And charging a price, putting a price on it, and doing a cap and trade system, which is a complicated way of saying that energy companies will find the most efficient way to solve the problem and reduce air pollution. That's the kind of solution that this situation calls for. Really make an incentive for the polluters to find the most efficient way to solve the problem. That's all we're asking here. And we did that really with acid rain. And it was a remarkable thing. And it actually cost a lot less than people thought it might. So one great example of the federal government working really well, solving a problem. It's not really a unicorn situation. It can happen again. That's what we're seeking. And I'll just say that I really wanted to say that I really invite CCL volunteers to look for our local chapters, find our chapter leaders, and seek us out and come to our meetings and look for a partnership and really come to us and push us along. I would say we're just beginning to really develop that partnership on the ground. And before I left, if there's one thing I wanted to do was make sure I invited CCL volunteers to really seek us out at the local level and come and talk to us and work with us.
Great. So thank you all for those wonderful answers, this great discussion. And I think we'll go to some audience questions now. If anyone has a question at this point, you can still jot it down on your card and someone will come pick it up. But otherwise, we'll go to my colleagues in the back to let us know what the audience is curious about.
So this question is for Salome. You mentioned video testimonials. Do you submit these to congressional offices? Can you talk about the logistics of delivery?
Yeah, so we do two types of video testimonials. The first type of video testimonial is a more organic and more difficult, really, type of video testimonial where our canvassers literally get people that are walking in their neighborhood and asking them, hey, thank you for signing this petition right now. Do you mind recording a few seconds of why climate change is important to you? And that we do as a way to really gauge the average resident's climate literacy, because so often you'll hear a person, yeah, I believe in climate change, and then they'll record a video saying something along the lines of, I really like penguins, and like ice is really important, and so, I don't want it to melt, something along those lines. And I find that very interesting because, again, it goes back to the point of, like, you ask 10 out of 10 people believe in climate change, and then 3 people really understand the impacts in their everyday lives. The second type of video and those we do upload, all of the video testimonials we upload on our YouTube channel and on our website, floridaclimatepledge.org. There's another type of video testimonial which comes out of our Climate Speaker Series. And the Climate Speaker Series Network is an actual workshop where we train our leaders and our volunteers and people that just come to our events on how to communicate the impacts of climate change. We do a whole hour seminar, and then we really ask people to think critically about, like, the first time that climate change impacted their lives and how they see climate change impacting today. And those videos, I actually do a compilation, and then when I go into congressional offices, I show a compilation of video testimonials from that congressional district. Of course, we also provide the links to the website to the members of Congress when I'm following up, or just different stakeholders, business leaders if we're running a corporate campaign, or local state legislators. But I mean, whether their staffer actually goes on our website and looks through these videos is debatable. when I go to their office, one of the things I literally do is I open up my computer and I show them the video in front of me, and I pause it and I ask if they have any questions. I'm like, did you know that there are over 7,000 constituents still living in tent cities because of Hurricane Michael? This is actually a resident talking about their experience after Hurricane Michael in the Panhandle, and that's really a conversation opener.
Great, thank you so much, Salome. This one's for Emily. So you mentioned that FCNL has a broad portfolio of climate issues that you work on. But for the other 25 faith groups in your working group, are they all on board regarding carbon pricing, or is there any other kind of outreach that CCL could be facilitating in that?
That's a great question. So I would say of those groups, there are several that have actually endorsed HR 763. The ones off the top of my head I can think about, the Presbyterian Church USA, I believe the United Church of Christ has endorsed it. I want to say one of the Universalist associations, yes, Unitarians. And then then the Young Evangelicals for Climate Action. Then there's groups who are really interested in carbon pricing but have more questions and want to learn more, and are kind of going through an internal process right now to figure out if they want to endorse a bill or just kind of support carbon pricing more broadly. And then we have a few groups that are a little bit more skeptical. I think groups that are listening to concerns coming from environmental justice communities about market-based solutions more broadly, or concerns around impact on kind of rural communities. And so I think it's what our work on our carbon pricing interfaith principles has done is it's really allowed us to have some robust conversations around where are those tension points, and how we can work through. I think what this process has also allowed us to realize is that people are open. Even those who maybe started out skeptical are open to carbon pricing being one tool that is used, but wanting to be really clear that we're going to need a lot more targeted policies and legislation to really help address some of the historic injustices that have been a result of our economy and of climate change. And so I think when you frame it as part of a broader suite of policy solutions, it's more likely to get support from some of those faith groups.
Thank you. For Steve, how do you suggest CCL approach other outdoor sports organizations to support the Energy Innovation Act? So examples might be in a hunting organization or Ducks Unlimited.
Did you say how do we do it, or have we done it?
How should CCL volunteers go about that?
That's a great question. Not to pat ourselves on the back too much, but I think Trout Unlimited is out ahead of some of the other organizations on supporting this bill and really working on climate change solutions. So, the first thing is to just realize that some of the other organizations may not be as far along on their search for truth and justice as we are. So, I think just go slowly. Some of the other organizations are still getting over the threshold of, really tackling it from a very fundamental level. So I think just start slowly with talking about the impacts and solutions, the really practical solutions that this bill brings, and then you really stay with them and find out the things that are important to them in their particular area, and try to make that connection of climate change impacts on the resources that they care about locally, and try to expand out from there.
Great, thank you so much. This one's back to Emily. So you mentioned that there's about 7 different carbon pricing bills right now. What would you suggest or think can be done to accelerate the passage of any one of these bills?
That's a great question. So I think there are a couple of things that we think about. So one, you want to make sure that you have, for any of these bills, that you have co-sponsors on the committees of jurisdiction. So we've been focusing a lot on House Ways and Means members. We're also working to make sure that carbon pricing as a concept is included in one of the number of processes that various House committees and Senate committees are currently going through. So the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis in the House, also the Energy and Commerce Committee, they're both going through these kind of in-depth stakeholder engagement processes to figure out what's our plan to get us to net zero emissions by 2050. And they've been allowing organizations to actually submit comments and proposals and ideas for what types of policies should be included. So one thing that we've done is we've submitted our carbon pricing principles and some of our analyses to those processes to kind of ensure that carbon pricing is included as they're coming up with the plan that's going to be needed. And then I think, as you all do, we're trying to build up as many co-sponsors as possible on all of these bills. So I think the more co-sponsors that carbon pricing legislation can get, the more likely that it'll gain momentum. Because I think we believe when you have the next political window where there's enough political will and kind of momentum to actually really start to move climate legislation, we want carbon pricing to be something that can really easily be pulled off the shelf, that members of Congress have been educated enough about the policy that they have a basic understanding of how it works, what their questions are, they've all been addressed, and so it makes it just so much easier to kind of have a policy ready to go to get a vote on. So there's a number of things that can be done, and I think we're really looking at this Congress as a critical time to lay the foundation, to really educate members and build up support so that when we do have that next opportunity, carbon pricing can be ready to go.
This one's for Salome. There seems to be a lot of momentum in Florida on climate solutions, and there's a broad ecosystem of different climate groups. How does CCL fit into your work in terms of overlap in volunteer initiatives, in membership, and coordinating?
Yeah, so I think that, from the Clio Institute's perspective, we're so happy to be able to have an opportunity to work with Citizens Climate Lobby. I come from Miami, so I may be a little biased when I say that the Miami chapter of CCL was actually really instrumental in kind of my personal development as a climate activist. Actually, like, my mentor is here in the room somewhere. He's with the Citizens Climate Lobby Miami chapter. And I remember, so not only does the chapter work with us in the Clio Institute in terms of volunteers, so our canvassers actually work with the CCL chapters to provide data, information, additional names, and we're actually kind of in that process, right, where we figure out, as we see that more people throughout the state of Florida want to get engaged, how are we strategic in the way that we engage these people to actually be effective in their actions? And that's something that the Florida Climate Pledge has been working really hard on, is every time that we're gonna go out, write a letter, that we're gonna make a phone call, that we're gonna do a rally or an event, we wanna think, is this actually going to strategically impact our member of Congress into climate action? Because if we're just gonna be rallying outside of City Hall every day of the week on a Tuesday, how is that strategically fitting into our plan? So as far as our collaboration with CCL, the best things that we've been able to do is work with volunteers to go out into the streets and meet people where they're at, have real conversations, and then being able to move them up the leadership ladder so that they're able to effectively communicate the impacts of climate change, and even more importantly, effectively communicate the climate solutions that make sense for our communities. So it's canvassing and recruiting members, helping us train volunteers, and adding more momentum to the local chapters that are doing the hard work of training communicators for legislative action.
Thank you. So could each of you talk about what it is that specifically hits home with the membership of your organization, what climate impacts it is, what narratives you're hearing from your grassroots members that is hitting home with them and resonating with them?
Old guys first. The thing that I hear about from our members is just what I was talking about. More and more they see it directly in their lives, and that's a change over the last 10 years. Again, certainly here in the East we have our share of climate impacts, but really in the West, it's an incredibly strong force and really fast change, whether you're in California and you're seeing fires, or Montana seeing your favorite river closed early for fishing because the water's too warm. Just more and more, the impacts, I think, are what are moving people. But then, of course, our members, and, God love them, there are far too many that are like me, really think about our kids and the next generation. And it just kills me, and I know it kills many of our members, to think that on our watch, we may have done things that really didn't solve the problem. We didn't rise up to meet the problem. So that's, just an incredibly powerful passion that, we need to tap into better over time.
I'll actually have to agree with that. Something that I've been coming to realize, and I know a lot of organizations have been coming to realize, and something that I mentioned in my introduction, is the realization that we need to get past the fact that climate change, of course it's an environmental issue, but it is not only an environmental issue. Climate change affects every single issue that we're talking about, and in our movement as a whole, we need to understand that because it impacts absolutely every issue in our everyday lives, regions and demographics of people are going to care about climate change for different reasons, just the different reasons that they care about life, right? I mean, some demographics of people, for example, in the Panhandle, we are seeing allergies exacerbated on a level that we've never seen before. So a person living in Tallahassee now has allergies way different than they were experiencing 10 years ago. In Miami, people can't play outside as often because extreme heat is really burning people up. People's productivity is lower because of outside labor. They can't be as productive in farms anymore. So it's depending on your geographic area, depending on your demographic, depending on your income level, climate change is going to hit home differently. And so speaking with climate change as in it's like a one message fits all is actually not the most strategic way that we found to move forward the movement. It's almost like, where are you coming from, and how is climate change impacting your life, more so than climate change is impacting all of us in the same way. So it's being specific and meeting people where they're at.
So very similarly, I think personal stories is the most essential part of a lobby visit, and I think our constituents are really experiencing the impacts of climate change in a way that they haven't before. It really is a human issue. I think our constituents also look at climate change from a very intersectional lens, kind of connecting it to all the other issues that we work on. So one of FCNL's main policy priorities is ending endless wars and thinking about militarism and what that means for our society and our budget. And so connecting climate change to the military and increased operations abroad. I think people really connect climate change to immigration and forced migration. And so I think it's been a really interesting way to draw constituents to care about climate change, who maybe that wasn't their top priority, but they're seeing how linked and connected it is with almost every issue that FCNL works on. And finally, I would just say that our constituents are really inspired by how much the conversation and dialogue has changed in Congress in the last year. Compared to where we were a year ago, it's truly incredible how much climate change is being covered in the news, how their committee hearings in both chambers, led by both parties, talking about climate solutions and the need to act. So we still have a ways to go, but I think it's been really inspiring for our constituents. They're really feeling energized by how climate change has been elevated, and so are looking for opportunities to kind of channel that energy and see some legislative action. So to me, climate change is one of the top priorities of Quakers around the country. We hear about it all the time, and they're really eager to engage on the issue from a variety of perspectives.
Excellent. One question that we had is, how can we get in touch with these great leaders from the organizations that are gracing us with our presence today? And my suggestion would be that we have a person on CCL staff, Taylor, who is our National Outreach and Partnership Coordinator. And it is Taylor's job to interface with all of the great organizations that are lobbying in DC. So Taylor's email is Taylor, Taylor@citizensclimate.org. So please get in touch with her with questions about that. Flannery, I'll toss it back to you for some last wrap-up comments, and then we will be going to dinner break with our next session started at 7:15.
Okay, great. I'll just, as we close out, I'd love to ask if you guys have a last piece of advice for our volunteers who will be talking to Congress tomorrow. What's one thing that you would advise them to maybe keep in mind or comfort them about the process of lobbying? Any tips?
I'll give you a tip. Just engage. I love the drill that you were doing, the exercise you were doing of connecting. Establish that connection and build it out over time. I think that is the most important thing that you can do. You have to be persistent, but you have to be persistent in a good way where you're really engaging with the people that you're talking to, getting to know them, and then building from that to find common ground through which we can pass legislation.
Yeah, something I would, sorry, no, please go ahead. Something I would love to say is persistence is key. A member of Congress didn't just a climate denier member of Congress didn't just wake up one day and say, now I believe about climate change. That didn't happen. The reason why we're seeing more conversation in both sides of the aisle is because of literal decades of people going to congressional offices and talking to the representatives about climate change and making it virtually impossible for people to increasingly harder to really deny the fact that climate change is happening. And so regardless of where the member of Congress that you're going to be meeting or their staffer lies on the issue, it's so important to know that it literally takes dozens and dozens and hundreds of touches before a member of Congress can be exactly where we need them to be. So continue pressuring your members of Congress, supporting your members of Congress, and feel free to ask them, what is it that you can do to help them be better on the issue?
I would just say that your all's presence is very known and welcomed on the Hill. Most of the offices I go into, I always ask them, do you hear a lot from your constituents about climate change? And they always bring up CCL. They say, yes, we have a great CCL chapter in our district that we meet with all the time. So the work you all are doing is really important, and it's being felt and it's being heard. And I'll just say, you all know this, but the thank you is so important in congressional offices. I think now more than ever, when things are so partisan and polarized, when impeachment drama is going on, we don't know if there's going to be another shutdown, being able to take the time out and really thank them and make that human connection is so invaluable. And people are getting criticized from both sides. It's really important. And so just have fun. It's so much fun getting to lobby, so enjoy it.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. All of you for your wonderful questions, you guys for your wonderful answers. So let's all give our panelists one more big round of applause. Great job. All right, and now it's time for dinner. So if you are leading a lobby meeting and have not yet picked up your folder of constituent letters, go to Congressional B room quickly before dinner, before they close, and we'll see you back here at 7:15. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Steve.